So I'm going to start the recording at this moment. Tracy, this is the first lecture that you've been at, but here's the third lecture. Tracy, have you been able to see the recorded lectures 1 and 2?
I've gotten through 1. I haven't gotten to 2 yet.
Okay, great. Okay, great.
I did the reading and the slideshow.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Got it. Excellent. Okay. Let's continue then on lecture 3, and here's what I'd like to cover in today's talk. Spend a little bit of time for Q&A and brief review of lecture number 2, really just about 5 minutes, and then I want to finish up what we talked about for the VOC. I see I've forgotten the parentheses, end paren. We had talked through some of the things in VOC, but we hadn't talked through some of the tools for prioritization, for developing metrics, and then for prioritizing those metrics with respect to the VOC. The VOC is voice of customer. You can see that we're really going hot and heavy with the acronyms now. Next, I want to spend some time talking through SciPoc. Hopefully we can get everybody on the same page and have a nice robust discussion about that. One of my favorite, I'll say it's a favorite tool, we'll call it a tool for now, and that's fine. But I want to spend some time talking through that. And then probably something that you may or may not be familiar with, a conceptual tool called DCOM that I highly recommend to Lean Six Sigma teams that they use at their toll gates. But what it really is it's a behavioral model for high performance companies, very similar to like a good to great model, but it's behaviorally based. I want to expose that to you, and I think you'll find it. Helpful. And then we'll talk through some data collection, and then we'll talk about assignment number 2. So for on the assignments, just this is something to pass out. I've received assignments from Shani, I've received from Patrick, and from Sue, and I don't think I've received from anybody else. So today was the day that we're supposed to turn in assignment number 1. So if you can get that to me sooner the better. That's excellent. The next one I'm going to get out to you. I'll send it out actually a little bit, probably after close of business. You'll see it tomorrow morning is probably the best place to do it, because that way it won't be so much of a burden of, oh man, we just finished and here comes the next one. But you should see that you're going to get into a pattern of, okay, there's some reading, there's some directed questions, there's some exercises that I have to do myself, and then there's some discussion that I have to have with other people in the course. So that's how it's going to go. So I'll kind of open it up first of all to any questions that you may have regarding what we talked about last time or anything thus far.
This is Tracy. For the green belt, it looked like on the homework it was reading and stuff, but not filling out that thing and sending it back. Do I just put my name on it and send it back?
There were some questions in the first reading assignment. There were like 2 or 3 questions.
Okay, I missed that. I'll go back and look.
I think it's on, yeah, it's on like slide 2 or 3. Let's just bring that up. Let's just bring up the first assignment. So let's see. So part of that was because it happened fairly late too in the game. But yeah, there's just a couple. And for this time it was primarily reading. So this is the green belt assignment. And you see that most of the things were black belt.
Yes.
Yes. But it's really just the bringing out the best in people. There were a couple of responses on slide. I guess it's slide 4.
From the book reading.
From the book reading, right?
Okay. I'm sorry, I missed that. I looked at the one.
No, that's okay. And then on the slides, it's you'll want to complete those journal entries, and essentially it's just kind of what did I get out of that section. That's really what we're kind of looking for. It's
okay.
Self-check for you, really. Okay. The other thing that's going to be happening this week with the black belts, not with the green belts, is we're going to be starting the one-on-ones. So I believe Sue and Shani, that's tomorrow?
Correct.
I'm sorry?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Oh, that was Sue. Hi, Sue. And also Patrick, we're going to be talking tomorrow?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And Brad on Thursday, and still trying to schedule Jim onto Thursday, and we'll see how that goes. And then the following week, Tracy, you, and I see John just joined us as well. John and Rod will all have short one-on-ones as well. But that won't happen until the following week. Okay, so that's kind of what's going on. Okay, so I'm going to then put this out. Okay, so that was through assignment number 1. So yeah, so if you can, if you finish the reading, great. For the green belts, it's just those 2 directed responses that are on slide 4. Fill those out and shoot it back to me. And on the black belts, it's a little bit more. I did get a question earlier, and I should have left. Boy, I should have left that open, so I'm going to. I think I got it from Shani, but hopefully you've kind of worked through this as a black belt, where it's asking you to respond. It's better if you can just respond right in line in the document and save it. If you can't, like on some of these, it should be fairly straightforward. On some of these exercises, you may want to attach other artifacts, like there was a scoping exercise. You can go ahead and attach another PowerPoint slide if you want to, and put your scope document in there, or a picture of it from Excel, or whatever you decided to do your scoping tool in. If it was PowerPoint, that's probably the easiest, but if it were Excel, you just copy the table and put it in there, and that would be fine. Okay. No need to worry about prettying it up too much. Okay. It's really just to make sure you work through it. Okay. All right. So let's get back to the VOC, and that was in week 1. So you'll want to flip to the section week 1, and let's see. I believe that week 1, and we'll want to start at slide 179. So 179. And just to give you some background, I mean, last time we talked a lot about sort of the beginnings of project management, right? And the idea of putting together a charter, and I think we all agreed that it needs to be really clear so we can have quick communication, but it's clear, and it should have a very clear problem statement, a set of deliverables, a business case narrative, some indication of the scope, and the people that are on the team. If it communicates that pretty quickly, all the rest of it is gravy. So I think we had a second page example where there was a timeline and some other metrics and all that kind of stuff. But if we can communicate one page, I think that often helps, especially if you're going to be doing team meetings or briefings to people. You want to just show it up and make sure that everybody's on the same page. Probably on Thursday, I'll share with you again another, I won't say a template, but an example of what I use to communicate in several of the projects that I've used recently. Sort of what's the narrative that I always go with if it's just a quick briefing or something like that. You can develop your own snapshot tools. That's all fine. Okay. We also talked about problem statements, and I think also we agreed, and we were talking through some of the things that can trip people up about putting solutions in problem statements, not being specific enough. I think John pointed out the word skyrocketed, with respect to how that was generally an incendiary word, and you wouldn't want to put it in there. It was too vague, except in the case of maybe the Korean missile launch. Maybe that was the right word to use in there. Anyway, we talked about that, and there were some examples. Hopefully you worked through those. in the homework. That was part of it. And then finally, we talked about VOC, and up to VOC, we talked about the differentiation between customers of internal and external. We also talked about the distinction that we could make between types of customers that are either end users or brokers or fixers, and that was a slightly different distinction. And where that's often helpful is in kind of cutting that Gordian knot between things like vendors. You know, sometimes we get confused about, well, is a vendor external or internal or whatever. Well, they're external, but they certainly don't count the same way that you know, an end user would, like a patient at a hospital or a member at a health plan or a consumer in a, you know, for a manufacturing company. All right. So that's kind of where we were. And then we talked about different ways of collecting customer data, from interviews and to surveys, market research, customer complaint data, and things like that. Okay, so I think that's kind of what we covered, and I think we also talked through what was some of the progression of what you might use first, second, and third, and so forth if you were actually conducting a customer study. And the progression was essentially this. You know, I'm going to draw it up on the whiteboard here. I tested this beforehand. Again, I'm fairly confident this is going to work this time. Ooh, let's do the blackboard. Now, ooh, look at that. Okay. So I think if we talked about sort of the progression of, if you know a little about your, oops, a little, or you know a lot about your process and the problems that you're trying to solve, what would be the preferred techniques if you just know, say, you don't know all that much about your project or your process? I guess let me write down some of the ways of collecting customer data. Interviews / focus groups. I think we called that direct. There's surveys. There's market. There's complaints. Right, a lot of times we have like complaint databases or things like you know, call center lists or who knows what. And then there's become a customer. What were some of the things that you would do if you don't know all that much about the process, just to kind of get a lay of the land? What would be maybe the preference here? Any thoughts?
Become a customer.
Oh, become a customer is a great one. I agree. I think that this is a very, very helpful one if you're just kind of beginning your, let's take a look at this particular process or product and understand what's important. That can give you a pretty good idea of what are the questions and problems that people run into. Yep, great.
Interviews.
Interviews. All right. Interviews. Yeah. Brad's favorite. Was that Brad?
That's it.
Yeah.
Brad can take credit for it as Patrick, though.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And one of the things I really liked about, you know, when we're talking about characteristics of interviews, and interviews can be tricky and they can be high cost, and you have to be a little bit careful with them because there's biases that can be injected. I loved Brad's idea of kind of writing down the nouns that people are saying so you can follow up on those. I think that's an excellent idea. Okay. And then almost by default, things like surveys, market research. Complaint, I guess I could go either way on this. I could go either way. I still probably want to be looking at complaints if I have that data. But surveys are usually, it's not that helpful to blast out to like thousands of customers or things like that if you really don't even know what you're asking about. I know I didn't say this last time, but you know, I stay in an awful lot of hotels because I do a lot of traveling, and I fill out those comment cards. And I'm often shocked when the hotel asks me, was the bed comfortable? That's not usually what they ask. They ask all sorts of things about the linens and things like that, which is great. But I often wonder whether they're really asking questions that matter to me. Again, surveys are an excellent sort of second thing to be able to do because you can get a lot of objective data. Okay. All right. Excellent. Let me come back to here then, and so that's where we were when we when we last left off. And yes, I'm going to get out of my whiteboard. Okay, so let's talk through some of these three tools that we didn't last time. I want to talk through with you, share with you three things. One is what's called the Kano model and Kano analysis. So there's a model and there's analysis that goes along with it. Now the good news is it's a picture model, okay? It's a conceptual model, and you actually can develop a picture with it. So that's actually what I think is one of the more powerful things about it. It's a team and communication tool that can help focus us. The Kano model is really excellent for deciding essentially who are the key customers that we want to focus on, and what are the key customer needs that we want to focus on. So the Kano model is great for that. It's a focusing prioritization tool. We'll also cover CTQ Tree very briefly, and CTQ Tree is one of many types of tools that you can use to develop metrics. Okay, so you can if you're in a project that requires you to develop some metrics that don't really exist yet, this can help you do it. And I think we're like most companies, and I'm less familiar with Baptist than I am with Connecticut in Corning and some of the other companies that Jim has worked with. But what I can tell you is I'm familiar with an awful lot of companies, and if you guys are like most, you've got some places that are extremely well measured. Like, for example, your call center measures everything from, what happened on a call to the number of bathroom breaks and how much time people took for them, to places that are almost not measured at all. Like, for example, legal and compliance may not be measured at all, or sales is often not measured. Some places can really benefit from it, some can't. CTQ Tree is a way of kind of developing metrics if you're in that situation. There are other ways. I'm going to show you this way. Then finally, the VOC Matrix, which is a simplified model for helping to prioritize if you've got a number of different metrics that could be used. If you've got like 10 or 15 different metrics that could be used, and you want to whittle that down to a manageable number like 2 or 3, a VOC Matrix can be very helpful with that. So without further ado, let's just kind of dive into that and cover it. All right, so let's first of all talk about the Kano model. And like I said, it's a pictorial tool that's going to help us prioritize customer needs, or customer needs, wants, and desires, as people say. I'm going to start my my tool again. That was a short-lived hiatus from it. Okay, so so what is the Kano model? Well, it's a picture, okay? And let's just kind of walk through what that picture looks like. So so in this picture, you'll see, first of all, it's a quadrant model. So of course, consultants love it. But it's got 2 axes. One is quality. So on the right-hand side, we've got stuff that's really high quality. Whatever that means for the moment. We'll define it in just a minute. Okay? On the right-hand side, we've got high quality. On the left-hand side, we've got low quality. So if you can imagine a product, like let's say a car, right? If we were a producer of the car, low quality, if we did something that was poor, like let's say we made doors on a car, if we had poor quality, we would be over here, and that would mean essentially that we often made the doors with errors in them, or with problems with them. if high quality means we got it right most of the time. So that's what this axis is, okay? Right to left. The vertical axis going right to left is high quality versus low quality. Okay, and then on the y-axis right here, or the vertical axis, is satisfaction. So on the top half, you see you've got satisfied customers, and on the bottom half, you've got unsatisfied customers. In the middle, you've got sort of just marginally satisfied customers. Okay, now what Kano did that was really helpful was he said, obviously, well, first of all, obviously we want to be in the upper right quadrant, don't we? Because we want to have things that are high quality and we want highly satisfied customers. So that's this right here. Okay? So what Kano did was he envisioned 3 types of ways that you could satisfy customers, 3 types of characteristics, and he called them, well, he used Japanese, so he used different words, but he called them must-haves, satisfiers, and delighters. And these, by the way, these have different names. Some people call satisfiers more is better. Some people call them one-dimensional, which I don't like. But in any event, let's just kind of talk them through. So first of all, let's say must-haves. So let's talk through must-haves. Must-haves are things that that the customer doesn't notice if they're there, but they notice if they're not there, and they're a big problem. So, for example, let's use a hotel room. Suppose you check into a hotel, and you go into the bathroom, and that's probably not a good idea. How about this one? You look in, and there's fresh linens on the bed. Okay, right. So and if you go into the bathroom, they have all the different toiletries. They have shampoo. They have soap. They have toilet paper. It's all there. Okay. What I claim is those are must-haves. What doesn't happen is you don't say, "Oh man, awesome! This hotel they have shampoo. Isn't that great? Let's go call Grandma." No, that doesn't happen. What happens is, if you don't have toilet paper, or if you don't have shampoo, or if you don't have soap, you notice, right? Or if you don't have fresh linens on the bed, and anybody who's ever walked into a hotel room where it's clearly they haven't had maid service, it's a huge dissatisfier. So customers notice if they're not there, but they don't notice if they are there. Those are must-haves. Those tend to be must-haves. Okay. So in an automobile, it would be things like tires, or doors that actually open, or various componentry that works. Okay? That's number one. Now, satisfiers are things where you can think of that can be measured, usually that can be measured on some sort of continuous scale. Let me give you an example of this. Instead of using hotels, let's use automobiles. And if we're using automobiles, for example, you can think of something. What would be a satisfier? I'll just kind of throw this out for automobiles. Like if I were shopping for cars, some of the things I would think of would be, it would satisfy me if the car was economical. That is, it was low cost to own. It would satisfy me if it got good gas mileage, if it were reliable, if it were safe. I'm a kind of boring guy, so speed doesn't matter so much to me, but performance in terms of some sort of speed or acceleration could be one of those things as well. All of those different things could be measured on some continuous scale. And let me be very direct on this. So, for example, let's say that speed 0 to 60, no, let's say gas mileage, were very important to me. It can be measured, and it can be, and a car that gets 40 miles a gallon is better than a car that gets 30, is better than a car that gets 25, is better than a car that gets 20. That's different than something where it's like all or nothing, and that would be a must-have. Okay? So the interesting thing about satisfiers is these are usually the things that if you ask customers what they want, they tell you those. They tell you satisfiers. They usually don't tell you must-haves. Those are kind of assumed. So if you ask somebody about a car, they aren't going to say, well, what's really most important to me is I need it to have tires that are not punctured. No, they're not going to tell you that. They're going to say things like, well, it's really important to me to have a safe car. It's really important to have a reliable car. Make sense? Okay, those are satisfiers. And then finally, delighters. Delighters are things that, they're the opposite of must-haves. They're things that if the customer doesn't have them, they don't notice. But if they have them, they notice and they're happy. Okay? So an example for me was my friends down in San Antonio might not get this, but was the heated seats or bun warmers in cars. I got a Volvo once years ago. I now have a new car, but I got a Volvo and it had heated seats. I never knew what I was missing. Oh my God, it was great in the winter when it snows and you have that. Okay? Didn't even know it. But when I got it, it was something that really was a delighter for me. And then cars that didn't have it, it was a big negative for me. So that's that. The last thing I wanted to say was that on this particular picture, if we look at it, we see that they have different trajectories, right? So must-haves, the best you can do with only getting must-haves is a marginally satisfied customer. So getting all the must-haves right, it doesn't get you any loyalty, but it gets you in the game. If you have satisfiers, you can actually build some loyalty and get some pricing power in the market, and get some other advantages. Longer-term customers, things like that. If you're an Apple and you can constantly come up with things that people hadn't thought of, and it delights them, that's great. Microsoft, for example, is not a company that's good at the delighters. Whenever they try it, they fall flat on their face. They try to present something that really delights, and it goes in at least in the consumer market. On the business market, they're better. Generally speaking, it's received lukewarm at best. But Apple often hits the market, at least recently. And what is this here? So what this here is, where it says competitive pressure, that simply means that what happens to delighters after they've been accepted in the marketplace? Well, first they become satisfiers, and then eventually they become must-haves. So a great example on that, and this is getting old. I'm really dating myself here, but is, if you can recall, I think most of us are old enough to remember this, but when VCRs first came out, you were able to record things where you didn't actually have to watch the show. And you didn't have to watch the show. You could record it and watch it later. And that was fantastic, right? Because you didn't have to stay up late to watch Johnny Carson or Jay Leno or whatever. You could actually just record it and watch it the next day. That was a delighter. Well, what is it today? It's nothing, right? It's expected. In fact, people don't even have that. They have TiVo, or now you can just watch it on the internet or probably on an app on your iPhone. So, yeah, and Hulu or something like this. So, competitive pressure pushes things forward. Okay.
And Mark,
yes.
one thing that jumps out to me is with that diagram, this is Brad here, by the way, is if you keep doing what you've always done, you're going to get less and less result out of it as that competitive pressure pushes you to obsolete.
That's true. Mm-hmm.
A lot of times we think, well, it worked in the past, so let's just go back to what we were doing, and that's not going to take you forward.
Right, and often that's that's often something that a lot of businesses say, well, let's get back to our basics, or let's get back to our core. And that works in a way, but it's probably not. It's often not enough. The thing that we'll also see, though, is that because there is a priority. If there are must-haves that you're not meeting, you must work on those first. You absolutely have to work on them first. Let me show you how this might work in a specific example. What you might do is you might start by brainstorming. What are the needs of the customer. You can do this from any data that you get. If you've been doing interviews, you can scribe various things onto sticky notes or something like that, and put them into the categories of must-have, satisfiers, and delighters. There's also another set of questions that I'll share with you in just a few minutes that can help you if you're stuck on that. But if we were doing yeah, so you put those in, and then you draw the Kano onto a flip chart or onto what we're doing right now, and you can actually place the sticky notes where you feel they should go. What I mean by this is you can use data like company data to help you understand where you really are, but it's often helpful to just get an idea of where we are in things. Okay, and then you place the sticky notes where they should be, and you prioritize. So what that might look like would be, if you had must-haves, like let's suppose that you were managing McDonald's and you wanted to improve the drive-through service. You might have for us, let's say the in-house dining. Let's say the opposite of drive-through, the in-house dining. You might have a couple of different customers. You might have parents or adults, and you might have children. So it often helps to segment and do a Kano for each of those, or for the most important. If let's say adults were the most important, you might go through and you might say, well, there's several must-haves. There's things like, well, we need fresh food. We can't poison anybody. Well, we already do that pretty well. Maybe maybe we're pretty good at not poisoning people, so that's over here. And maybe we're good at not getting the orders wrong, and things like that. But on the other hand, maybe our bathrooms are not always clean, and maybe our our service is not very good. We don't always deliver within 30 seconds or within a minute or something like that. And some of these we're kind of lukewarm at. I don't know. I haven't been to a McDonald's in a very, very long time. I've been lucky enough to keep my kids away from them, so happy about that. But anyway, that's how that might go. So again, if you were looking at this, you might say, well, okay, since we do pretty well on these must-haves, we can leave those there. These are things that we might want to think about, but these are really high priority. We've got to do them. We might do the same thing with the satisfiers. Here would be sort of like menu options and things like that. Maybe this is menu options. I happen to be a vegetarian, so McDonald's is really a terrible place for me. So that's another place. Menu options are terrible for me. I'm also clearly not one of their high priority customers, so they probably wouldn't be thinking about me. And then you do the same thing with delighters. And by the way, the breakdown is usually about the same. If anything, there's more satisfiers than I've indicated right here, but there's often very few delighters. And that's kind of normal. I mean, we don't think of them, they don't think of them, and you really can't, in most of the garden variety Six Sigma that we're doing, which is improvement projects, we'll be focusing most on must-haves and satisfiers. If you're on a design project, you definitely want to be looking at what are the things that could be delighters to people. Like in the Sue, you'll recall that one of the things we kind of bantered around in our front-end quoting project was what would happen if we could, what are the possibilities of being able to turn around a quote instantly? So that might be a delighter to either a broker or a potential employer group. Okay? Just kind of hopefully this makes some sense. It's a team tool. It can give some prioritization. And it just gives lay of the land. You can add more data into it if you want. What I would say is it definitely is important to keep in mind the segment that you're going after, right? So if we were going after the taste of the food at McDonald's, and we actually interviewed a bunch of people who were putting into the same context as the taste of food at Morton's Steakhouse. McDonald's is simply not in the same league, and they're not trying to be. So, it might give us a mistaken impression. So understanding who the customer segment is pretty important before kind of going into here as well. Okay. I'm going to move on from Kano. I think it's a great tool. It's a lovely tool that you can use to pictorially get things in there. I wouldn't say you have to use it on every project, but it's often very helpful to build consensus on a team and then communicate to leadership as well to say, look, here are the things that here are the things that we're going to focus on, and that seems to make sense because we're doing them poorly and they matter to the customer. So let's improve those things. Okay, let's move on to a CTQ tree, and I don't want to overdo this because I think we can get it pretty quickly. A CTQ tree is something that helps you develop metrics when you don't have any metrics, and the way it works is simply this. Let me just walk through an example. So I'm going to move on to the next slide. Get back onto here. There we go. Okay. So let's consider something that's like a let's consider the product to be a customer invoice. If the customer perhaps we would get, if we went out to the customer and we said, you know, what do you expect in an invoice? They might give us a number of different answers, and we might categorize them into, let's say, these 4 categories. I need it to be easy to understand. I need it to be right. I need it to be relevant to me, right? Don't send me stuff like, oh, by the way, I can sign up for all this other stuff, all these other services for your product. I just need it to be relevant to me. Like you're sending me, I don't know, ads to get the cleaning products or baby products, and I don't have any babies. And I need it to be complete. You know, make sure that you don't miss a second page if there's a second page. And you know, in your project you might get something that's totally different. But you start with that top VOC element, and you might realize that a lot of these things are not necessarily, don't lend themselves instantly to measurement. So how do we know, if you ask the question, how do we know that this is true? So let's just, and when we try to come up with an answer, and we go as deep as we need to in order to get something that's measurable. So we might start with, it's easy to understand, and we might ask the question, how do I know if it's easy to understand? Well, one thing would be is, well, I could grasp what's going on in less than a minute. Okay, if that were true, how would you know that's true? And that might lead us to down to another path. Okay, or you might say, you know what, that's not a fruitful path. Let me try a different way. If it's easy to understand, it might fit in one page, or it might fit in a pretty short piece of paper, or something like that. So it can lead us to different measures by using this tool. Okay, and you can do the same thing for any of these things, right? Accurate might mean that the calculations are correct, or very few items are estimated, or both of those things. And we can also then decide what we mean by few and all that kind of other stuff. That's coming up later today. The reason why I put all of this stuff in here is because I just wanted to let you know that a lot of these things can kind of get very bushy. So if you're facilitating something like this, try and get one of those stories that kind of sounds like the house that Jack built, or the knee bone's connected to the leg bone, and the leg bone's connected to the hip bone. If it reads like that, then you can usually get to something that's pretty pinpointed and something that works. So, for example, complete, you might say, well, something's complete if it allows me good troubleshooting, if it allows me good customer service, if it's high quality. I don't know. There's all sorts of things that can go in there. But if you can go down a single path and get to something that's measurable, that's often helpful. Maybe the best one would be easy to understand. Well, it's easy to understand if I can understand it in less than a minute, if it fits on a single page, if it's in type that I can read. And you can combine all those different things. All right. This is just one way of doing it. It's not the only way. Okay. I want to move on to something else called a VOC matrix. And a VOC matrix is, suppose we have multiple measurements. And you can see I was kind of grasping at that in the last section anyway. A lot of times we have multiple ways of measuring something, or we have so many measurements that we could use as results variables that we need to prune the tree a little bit. We need to cut it down. And this can be particularly true in a design project where you may have dozens of variables. And in order to move, you need to be able to get that down to a decent sized set. There's been a lot of research, and there's some conflicting thoughts around this, but generally speaking, the limits on what we can do for at each level for relevancy metrics, for result metrics, are typically around 7 to 10. That's about the limit to the human brain in terms of short-term memory of being able to handle different things in there. So if you're designing a scorecard or something like that, you should probably shoot for something like that. That's a tough order. I understand that. Having said that, on a project, on an improvement project, we're going to want to get our key output metrics down to like 2, and one primary one. So we'll want to have things like reduce the time for discharge, or reduce the number of errors in loading provider data at the insurance company. Okay. All right. So that's what this tool is for. It's for helping prioritize that. Okay. I think probably the best way of doing that is to walk through. Is to simply walk through the example. Now the slides give you this, but I want to show you that there's also a template that's in there, and it has an example filled in. Let's walk through the in the slides the way that this would work. We would start out by saying, okay, what is it that we're really talking about? The example I've got in here is a service that puts new tires on a car. Okay, so at the hospital, it could be a discharge. That could be your product or service, or Sue, in your project, it could be a specific NPS report, and in Jim's project, which is at the moment, it's an innovation process. It could be a new idea, development of a new idea. That might be those might be the products. I tend to talk about them in tangibles, so I like to talk about products. Okay, if we're considering this from the customer point of view, I'm just kind of throwing out, here would be where you put in the VOC attributes. And the idea is that you're going to relate these VOC attributes to the proposed measurements. So you'd start by listing the attributes, and I'll just read a couple of them. Is the service immediately available to me? That is, if I need new tires, can I get them on my first appointment, or something like that? Can I get it right away? Is it convenient for me? Is the job completed quickly? Is there little interruption to my mobility? Is the work completely explained to me, etc.? Is it low cost to me? Is it predictable cost? Is it correct the first time? All of those are measurements. All of those are VOC attributes. Okay, the second thing you do is you'd fill in the proposed measurements. Now, I've only put in 5 here just to keep it manageable, but often there can be many, many, many. So, for example, percentage of times my first appointment is accepted. Okay, hours between when I drop it off and when I pick up the car. The customer wait time in the shop, the hours that the vehicle is unavailable to me, whether I picked it up or not. The dollar difference from my estimate, right? If I paid more than what you were quoted to me, that doesn't make me happy as a customer. And there could be many, many others. Like, for example, if you're like if the places where you take your car a lot, like the places where I've taken my car in the past, what they care about is their labor hours. So labor hours might be in there. It's not a very customer-centered metric, by the way. Okay, the third thing you do is you simply score each of these cells as to whether it's related to the other or is not. It doesn't matter whether it's positive or negative, but if one is a good indicator of the other. So, for example, let's just go back here. Is the service immediately available to me? Well, the percentage of first-time appointment requests that we can accept, that gives me a good indication of whether this service is immediately available to most customers. Okay, so a yes gets put in there. Okay, and so forth. And you want to fill it out only if there's a moderate or a strong relationship between the two. You don't want to make it so that it's difficult. If you have to explain a lot as to why, leave it a no. Okay? And you simply go through all of these, and you then at the end, when you've filled all this out, and this is a team tool, you work it with the team. Then you look at the bottom, and this just counts the number of yeses. So this is a very simple tool that essentially says, well, for this particular metric, how many of these VOC attributes does it line up with? Okay, that's it. That's all it does. Doesn't do any more than that. But you can see that by looking at this, very quickly you can say that the customer wait time in the shop or the hours that the vehicle is unavailable are better customer-centric measurements than the difference in dollars from my estimate or the hours between drop-off and pickup. They're better. Okay, so they would be maybe preferred measurements if we could get them. It doesn't mean that we stop there. Okay. Now I want to show you just very quickly. Whoops.
Mark, I got a question on that.
Yep.
If you were doing a house of quality, you try to line up one input per output as much as possible. Do you still try to do that here, or do you not even worry about it?
That's a great question, and it was leading me to what I was going to also show you. I just wanted to show you.
Never mind. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah, in house of quality, what I would say is you would try to get one or more metric for each of the CTQs. For each of the VOC elements, and you want to have at least one that's going to be highly related. QFD is a more complex tool. This is a very, very simplified QFD matrix. But let me show you an example. And I just wanted to show you, this is a template that's in your directory, and you just fill it out right here, and these are all just yeses and nos. And if you put in yeses, you can see the count is going up here. And here's the example. And what I wanted to point out, and that was a great, I'm glad that you mentioned that. One thing that you'd want to do at the end of your analysis is if you only had these 5 measurements, you ought to look across and make sure that if you're picking one or more of these, let's say you pick the hours that the vehicle is unavailable, 7 and 6, those are pretty close, so let's pick this one right here. Well, one of the first things you could see is that these all are no's. So that also prompts you to look across and see, well, is there a way that we could also have a measurement that gets this in? Is it completely explained, courteously explained? And it turns out that all these are no's right here. So this would probably prompt you to say, you know what, we need another measurement that's going to hit on these VOC elements. Okay, so it's the nice thing about the matrix is you can kind of use it afterwards and say, yes, it prioritizes, but you can also do a cross-check and say, do we have all our bases covered? Was that kind of what you were getting at?
Yeah, so basically this is just to prioritize. It's not necessarily to line up your measurement system with your critical to quality numbers. I wouldn't say it's just to do that, because you can obviously do what we're doing right now, which is, okay, now that I've got this, I can see that I've got a measurement that does cover this, that does cover this, that does cover this, but it's not a one-to-one. Yes. Very often in a design project where you'd want to use QFD thoroughly, you would want, for any VOC attribute, you'd want at least a measurement that was lining up almost 100% with that. So you could really use it as a verification that, yes, I have a measurement that says that the service is immediately available. For example, this one right here, I would say is pretty directly related. The percentage of first-time appointment requests that I have certainly tells me if I can get an appointment request. And is it completed quickly? Well, this is probably a very good measurement for that. Little or no eruption to my mobility. I can certainly measure the time that people are waiting in the shop. And maybe there'd be some other things too. Sure.
Okay. But that's essentially how it's used, and hopefully you get the gist of that. And what I found is that if you do this on most improvement projects, that you'll end up using pretty good metrics. It's not something that I think you have to use on every project, because sometimes metrics present themselves and it's obvious. I'm going to reduce the wait time, Patrick, I think your project is just discharge, is around discharge, right?
It's length of stay, correct.
Length of stay. Okay, yeah. So I mean, there may be a number of different measurements that might or might not make sense for that project, and kind of understanding this lay of the land can help you prioritize. Which measurements we might use, which ones we don't, because there's a trade-off too, and some things are harder to measure than others. So in our pizza example that we kept on going back to, if we measured the time that it was ordered to the time that it was delivered, that would be one thing, but that might also be difficult, and we might have to worry about the measurement system with the delivery drivers. On the other hand, today with GPS, maybe it's simple and we can overcome that. So there's all sorts of trade-offs that you can talk about. Anyway, this is just a tool that can help prioritize and help build a picture of what we've got covered and what we don't have. Good. Okay, I'm going to shut this down. Okay, let's get back to our regularly scheduled program. Okay, so we did talk through all the things I wanted to talk through that we covered last time. That was the VOC. Now let's move on to so that covers for week 1. We should be completely done with that. Let's move on to SciPoc, and that's covered in and it's slides 2 through about right 2 through there we go, 2 through 16. Now I'm going to let you go ahead and read those slides, but I want to talk through SciPoc, what it is. So I thought we'd just kind of do it together on a blackboard. But one thing I did want to point out is that, first of all, SciPoc, it comes in the context of what I would call, if we're using our DMAIC navigators, remember in defined phase you're going to make the business case, you're going to link it to the customer, then you're going to put together a macro map of the process, a high-level process map, key outputs and scope, put together the team, put together a project plan, and then you're ready to really get going. A lot of these things are really done concurrently. So and I would even include really making the business case concurrently with this. But you're making that customer link, you're figuring out what the process is, you're figuring out what's the right way to measure it. All those things are kind of happening at the same time. And so SciPoc is one of those things that brings several things together, and as such, it's a very important thing for the team to do. So let me just walk you through what it is. So, and you can, I'll leave you to read the section afterward, but we'll just do this for now. So what a SciPoc is, first of all, SciPoc stands for, it's a S-I-P-O-C, and for you Star Trek fans, it doesn't have anything to do with Spock's dad, unfortunately. It stands for supplier, or suppliers, inputs, process, output, or outputs, and customers. Okay? That's what it stands for. And what it really is it's a relationship model that helps you relate. Brad mentioned early on the very first point that part of, or first lecture, that one of the main things about Six Sigma, one of the key principles, is understanding that end-to-end picture. Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about that as we keep going, but here's one of those tools that works great for that. So let me give you an example, and I think in last lecture we talked about the auditing project that I worked on last year with this food wholesaler. They're a warehouse. They deliver trucks of food to grocery stores. That's essentially what they do. I worked with the auditing team. What they do is they make sure that the trucks of food have the right stuff on them, and that the eggs aren't broken, and that the Clorox isn't on top of the beer, and stuff like that. Okay, so that's what they do. So let's develop a SIPOC for that particular process. So if we looked at the auditing process, I might start out by doing the following. I might start out by saying, here's what the first part is, and here's what the last part is. So in this case, the first part was I select the truck. That's where it starts. That's my start. So I'll label that as a 1. I select the truck. So in other words, in order to measure a truck, I need to know which truck I have. And where does it finish? Well, I finish, I'll just put the end down here. I finish when I complete my paperwork. Now, this is something that you'd want to vet with the team, but I'm just making this up right now. I'm not making it up, but you might start and work with yourself and maybe the sponsor or champion and sketch it up, and then have the team at least sketch it up in your brain and then facilitate this with the team. But that's how I like to start it by saying, here's the first part of the process, here's the last part of the process. Okay? And then I just call this a black box. I guess it's a white box right here. Okay? And I move to the right-hand side. Well, what are some of the outputs of this particular process? By the way, this isn't the only way to do this. This is just a way. And I think at the end you'll see how it works. Well, what some of the outputs are a audited load, a shipment, completed paperwork. Okay. And I keep going to the right. Who are some of the customers here? Some of the customers might be the stores, like Stop and Shop, or what do you have in San Antonio? What's your grocery store? Kroger?
HEB.
HEB? Yeah, that's who we're talking about there. Okay. The trucking company, not the same. And maybe dispatch, we'll say corporate, and so forth. And you'll want to take some time with the team, but at least this gives you an idea of, okay, there's the stores, but also the trucking company, and here's corporate, and here's what they receive. All right, so the trucking company gets an audited load, the stores get the shipment, the completed paperwork goes to corporate. We're trying to put all of this together. Once we've completed that side, we'll go on to the other side, and I'll do it, let's see. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Go back to here. Oh. This is what I wanted to do. Okay, and then we'll talk about the inputs, and generally speaking, there will be a lot of different inputs. So, for example, we'll have a schedule. We'll have an inventory list. Right? I have to know what's on the truck in order to count whether they got it right. I have to have a crew or people, and so forth. Ooh, I'll put over here the customer rep. They had a customer rep who was also managing in the store, and so forth. Usually you can, I'll need a jack, pallets. So here there's things like job aids. I'm sure you'll start to recognize here are these different things that we would have in our particular process as well. And then finally schedules now, or suppliers, I mean. So suppliers are people or companies that supply the inputs. So there's our company, I'll just say the warehouse, right? The warehouse would supply, for example, the people, and the warehouse would supply the, let me put over here, customer signature. See, I can't help but do a better SIPOC. The warehouse and the trucking company, they supply the truck. The stores supply the customer rep, and etc. So and sometimes there's a pallet vendor. Okay, and so forth. Maybe there's, I'll put here the shrink wrap. Okay, so to give you an idea, what we did was and this is just to kind of go back through it. And at this point, so we've gone from first and last on the process, beginning and end, and I've said here are the outputs from that process. Here are the customers. Then I went backwards and I said, okay, here are the inputs. Here are the things that make this process go, so to speak. And here are the people that supply those inputs. So if we think about it, the process is what we do. Outputs are what are created from that process. The customers are who we give those outputs to. The inputs are what we need to make the process go, and the suppliers are the things that are the people that give us those supplies. So if we look at it, okay, so going with what Patrick or Brad was saying the other day, these are verbs, these are nouns. Okay, and these are usually, I have to be able to connect these with people. They don't have to be individual people yet, but I have to be able to, in theory, connect them. Again, these are nouns. I know a noun is a person, place, or thing, but it's nice to be a little bit more specific if we can. Okay, these are people, right? So in the end, you're going to have to deal with a company. You're going to have to talk with a person at that company. Finally, once we've gotten all that, I like to fill in the process. And you don't want to do this at a deep level. You want to do it at the level of, say, 4 to 7 steps. So this process happens to be select the truck, unpack, count, pack, and notify. That is, tell the trucking company, okay, it's all packed up, ready to go, so they can ship it. And that's it. So you can see you're not going to solve any problems at this level, but you've created now a good basis for the team to talk about what happens where, and all that. Now, there's lots of different ways and places. There's lots of different ways that people can create SciPocs. For example, the method that I just gave you was to do first and last, that is begin and begin and end, and then move on to outputs and customers and inputs and suppliers. Some people prefer to do the whole process first. That's okay. What can happen, I can tell you, is that this can take quite a while to develop that, because to say, well, should we unpack and count? Should we consider that to be 1 step or 2 steps or 5 steps? That can happen. Either one works. Either one works. Just be aware of that. At GE, they're taught to start with the customer, so they call this COPUS. I have found that that doesn't work as well. Maybe that's me, but I've also found that many of the teams, they like to start with the process first. We're pretty close to the process, so we can understand it, and we can once we start to say, here are the vital things that happen in that process, then we can get the other things as well. Okay? Again, the output should be tangible things at this point. You can list measurements, but I would prefer something like customer signature rather than number of customer signatures per week or something like that. I would prefer just to list it as the noun at this point. Now, and then I should point out that also some people like to go all the way across and have the outputs only relate to this particular process step. I don't recommend that the first time that you're doing it, especially in the beginning of, say, in the define phase. It can be helpful later on. It can be helpful later on, but and it can also work, but I wouldn't want to limit myself in the very beginning. So anyway, so that's the basics of a SciPoc. And the funny thing that happens with a SIPOC is, and there are a number of different opinions on this. I have a pretty strong opinion. A SIPOC, a friend of mine actually calls it the bright shiny tool that you get the team to look at while you sneak in the definition of how everything's going to, of how the project's going to go. I don't know if I'd be that devious, but a SIPOC is something that really helps a team start to create something that they can talk about in a very tangible way. So, for example, once we've created the SIPOC, we can start to say things like, well, let me go back to here, white again. We can start to say things like, I think that a lot of errors happen when we count. Okay, now we all kind of understand where that fits and where it all comes in. I can start to measure, for example, how long it takes to count, or how long it takes between, what's the delay between when I count it and when I pack and notify, because there may be some things that have to occur between them, like get a customer signature or get a plant signature or something like that. Okay, so there's lots of things that can happen. Other things that can happen are you may find that you want to do a SIPOC on only a couple of steps. So, for example, you may find, oops, I have a sideways one. Let's erase all on here. Yeah, not sure why that was. You may find that, for example, you do a SIPOC with steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then this really turns out to be the meat of the scope, so then you can do a SIPOC on that when you start out. And that's often a really good way to start out any sort of thing that you're doing, and you get it to the right size or place that's going to make some sense. And by the way, once I get this, I can do things like I can measure the number of defects at step 2. And things like that. It makes it easier to help start to define things. It's a great tool, and I find that that whole narrative that you can create is way more important than the artifact itself, and that's why I was saying I don't, the artifact is not something that I would totally be, that I totally care all that much about, but it's largely the creation of it. Let's try this ourselves, and what I'd like to do is let's build a let's say our product service family, product service is the very nebulous pizza delivery. And let's not overdo this, but if we start with some of these, I'd like you to take let's take 10 seconds, let's take 20 seconds, and think about if we're going to try building this for the P, we'd start with the P, what would be the first step of this particular process, and what would be the last step? Okay, so take a moment and write down what you think would be the first step of this process and what you think would be the last step. There's no wrong answers here, by the way. Okay, so now I'll take a volunteer who would like to tell me what is the first step in our process here. What would be the first step let's say delivering a pizza? Maybe that's a better way of doing it, delivering a pizza.
Mark?
What would be the first step?
Mark?
Yes?
I have to take the order.
Take the order. Okay.
And I don't know if that's too far before delivering the pizza.
Excellent. Excellent. So that's exactly the kind of dialogue that you want to have, right? So once you start doing that, we can actually decide. For example, I'm guessing that because I wrote pizza delivery, that a number of you were thinking, well, I'm not sure what he means there. Does he mean just the delivery itself, or does he mean the whole process? So let's suppose that were, let's keep that. Let's go ahead and keep that. Take the order of the pizza. What might be the last step in this process? So thank you, Sue. What would be the last step? Somebody other than Sue.
You'd have to be deliver the pizza.
Okay, so literally maybe drop off pizza.
Yep.
I'm trying to use a different word than deliver. Drop off pizza like at somebody's doorstep or something like that, right? Okay, great. Okay, so that might be, somebody else might have the opinion that, no, it's the collecting of the money. Maybe those are both together, okay? But let's just go with this. I think those are good as any. Okay.
Hey, Mark, this is Patrick. I got a question for
Yep.
you.
Uh-huh.
I guess, I mean, this may be semantics or getting too much in the details on this, but on something like this, are we still considering the voice of the customer being the person getting the pizza? You know, because for instance, my last one could be drive back to the pizza shop, but the customer doesn't really care about that. So I mean, is it based on how you want it to go, or is this designed to be a specific tool for something?
Oh, great question. So first of all, it should be as is. So this should be as is, but the process is, especially if you're doing an improvement project, which is, you know, I keep reiterating this, but I think I need to because people have varied projects. We're mostly talking about improvement projects. So if you're talking about improvement projects, it should be, first of all, exactly what happens today. And it should be from your perspective because the process is what you do. Okay. Now, the customer may be involved in some of that. Like customer signing the papers may be part of that process of a discharge or obtain customer signature. That might be part of that discharge. But you wouldn't cut it off. You wouldn't say, well, what do you think we should, what's the voice of the customer we should get in here? This is supposed to be documenting sort of a as is. Good question. But you're right. I mean, we might say, you know, maybe drive back would be part of this, and people would. Then that's a question. Should we include drive back? Drive back, and you know, I guess if I were doing Spanish, I'd put it upside down and right side up. But if we're doing drive back, now that's a question of scope, right? So the sponsor might say no, driving back isn't included. Or the team might say, you know, it's not really important to include that, so let's get rid of it. Now, I just made that up. You know, you may disagree, and there'd have to be more discussion of it. But for the purposes of today, suffice it to say, yeah, that's in play. It's good to have that dialogue come up and say what really is the scope. You can see the SciPoc is a great place to kind of help develop that dialogue. Okay, what might be some of the outputs that we would have in this pizza delivery? Let's take a couple of seconds for that. Well, let's take maybe 10, 15 seconds, and we don't expect to get this complete. And you can just kind of shout them out as they come to you.
The pizza?
The pizza. I'm going to say delivered pizza. The reason I say something like that is because I want to make a distinction. If I were running the team, I want to make a distinction between sort of the raw pizza or uncooked pizza and cooked pizza and delivered pizza and all that kind of stuff. Good.
Money in your hand?
I'm sorry?
Money?
Money. Okay, got it. Money or payment. Yep. Okay. Great. And you know, those would probably be the two. If we were including the drive back, maybe the car is back in shop. Parking space. But again, we had said that was out of scope, so I'm going to cross that out. Okay.
What about the order itself?
The order itself? Yeah. So the order itself could be thought of as, I think it's fine to list it. It's fine to list it. Because these are things that you can measure the goodness of, right? How often did we get the payment correctly? Was the delivered pizza hot and fresh? Was it delivered within 30 minutes? Was the order correct? Now, this is less of an output. This is kind of an internal output, right? It might be the output of one of the steps, but it's fine to list it. It's totally okay. And then the customers might be obviously the pizza eater, consumer maybe. And how about our pizza shop? Okay, and so forth. And if you're Domino's, maybe the police. They're receiving all the tickets and accidents. Okay, and I think you guys understand enough to get it. What would be some of the things on the input side that we would be thinking about?
The order.
The order. Okay, so customer. Because customer order information, I'm going to say.
Yes.
Yep, good. Okay. What else? Are we presumably going to cook the order? Now here's where my method does not work as well. If we fill this in, and here's just something I've thought of recently, and sometimes maybe I do it this way, sometimes not, is if you fill it in before going to the right, you'll get some other things. Like, for example, some of the interim steps, I think clearly you would say things like relay to kitchen, maybe cook, pizza, box the pizza, and maybe drive and drop off, something like that, right? So it'd be something like that. Well, we'd need a stove or oven, people, and so forth. All this making sense? We probably need a credit card, service, or PayPal, or all that kind of stuff. Menu, car, lots of stuff. The more you think of it, the more that you need. And so, who are the suppliers? Suppliers would be the pizza company, the consumer. Consumer is supplying the order information. The now, you might not say the car company is the supplier of the car. You might want to say the employee is the supplier of the car, right? And all of this is helpful because it lets you connect all of these different things. For example, let's suppose that you're having problems. It turns out that your problems are with your delivery in step 5, and a lot of times it's because the car is not maintained properly. Well, that helps us start to think about, oh, well, who supplies the car? It's the employee. Maybe what we should do is we should get a company car, maintain that. Maybe that's an idea for improvement. So it helps us connect this whole thing. Anyway, it's a tool that I absolutely love, and it's a great team tool. I like to sketch them up like this and then let the team change it. Very, very, very helpful. Okay, so I want you to read the section, and we're going to have an exercise this week. One of the exercises that you'll do is on SciPoc. So you'll have some time to work that out. I'm going to move on after this, but I think you have enough on SciPoc to be able to be dangerous enough to ask me questions that are the right questions and good questions, plus you'll have the reading material. Before I move on, what questions do you have for me now? Okay, so black belts, you'll want to facilitate this. Green belts, you'll definitely want to, I think this should be able to help you kind of understand what are some of the relevant questions that are there. Okay, I'm going to move on, and what we're going to do now is we're going to move, whoops, one raise, dismiss that. Sounds like I shouldn't dismiss it, but okay. We're going to move on to the section on DCOM, and DCOM is something that was developed by a colleague of mine, I guess an ex-colleague, because he unfortunately he died last year in November. His name is Jim Hilgren, and he was a behavioral psychologist and a heck of a nice guy, and a real mensch. You'll miss him. But anyway, it's a behavioral-based performance and strategy alignment tool. Let's go into it, okay? I'm going to move ahead pretty quickly. Here's where you ought to use DCOM, or here's a place where you're going to use DCOM. I'm on slide 19 now in week 2. You can use it to help make the business case, but more if you're on a project team, I believe that it's very, very helpful at toll gates in particular to see, are we on the right track? Are we ready for the toll gate? Have we done what we needed to do? Now, Jim developed it he did some work at Chevron in the early 80s and mid-80s. And at Chevron, one of the things they wanted to do was they wanted to understand what it took to be a top quartile oil producer, oil company. And that was all well and good, but they started out by just looking at oil companies, but eventually they looked at all sorts of different companies, and it came up with these 4 different characteristics. I'm going to move through some of the slides here, which are really about why should we care about behavior. Suffice it to say that all processes, technology, strategies, they all work because of people. So having a behavioral-based model is actually pretty helpful, or can be pretty helpful. Let's move on to slide 23. And I just wanted to put this up. If you're a fan of the book Good to Great, which I happen to be, which is Jim Collins wrote around 2001, he's got his own model about what are the various things that people have to look at to be able to move from a good company to being a great company. Things like level 5 leadership and have the right people on the bus before you start the bus moving, all that kind of stuff. Hedgehog. If you want to learn all that stuff, it's wonderful. We can talk about it. You can tell I get really excited about that kind of stuff. In our one-on-ones, I'm happy to talk through that. But DCOM's a little bit different. Very, very high level. It should make sense to you. And from a company perspective, from a team perspective, from a project perspective, from an individual perspective, you can see that these things are going to be a decent, at least the model makes sense. So here are the 4 components of the model, very straightforward. Direction, that is, in order to be successful as an individual or as a team or as a company, we need to know where we're going. Competence. In order to, and I'll just cut it short now. In order for a team to be successful, a project team to be successful, we have to have the right competencies on the team. Okay? Third thing is we have to have the opportunity. Okay? We might have the right direction, we might have the right competency, but if nobody's going to let us do it, we can't do it. Okay? We're not going to have the opportunity. And finally, we have to be motivated to do it. We can have the right direction, we can have the right people on the team. We can have the opportunity, but if nobody wants to do it, we're probably not going to be able to do it. So let's talk through a little bit more detail what we mean by each of those different things. But my guess is you're already there, or close to it anyway. A couple of little wrinkles, but I don't want to overdo this. Direction simply means, in Jim's world, Jim Hilgren's world when he developed DCOM, I should say that this is something that is not every Six Sigma program teaches, and I found it so helpful because it's so intuitive. So if you have heard this before, bear with me, but if you haven't, like I said, I think you'll find this conceptually pleasing. If we're talking about a team, do we have the vision? And I don't want to go into the whole vision statement thing, but basically, do we know where we want to end up? You know, if you're taking a trip, knowing that you want to be in LA is very, very helpful if you're in Nebraska. Well, they say if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there, right? So know where you're going. Second aspect of it was measures. Not only do we know where we're going, but we have measures that help us understand if we're moving in that direction. And then the third one, the third piece of this is values. And I'll just say this. Do we understand the actions, the behavioral actions that we do that help us achieve the vision using the principles that we have that are our values? So, for example, when I worked at Corning, one of our values, and I'm pulling it right off of my wall right now, one of our values was we were supposed to be rigorous at Corning. Okay? So that was a value, regardless of what the vision was for our project. A value that we operated was we were rigorous. And what that meant as a leader was that we communicate performance expectations clearly, we insist on disciplined processes in key areas, We don't tolerate shoddy or incomplete work, etc. And what that meant as an individual contributor was that we demonstrate an understanding of what's expected of me, that I consistently produce accurate and complete work on time, that I pay attention to detail. Those are things that, those are behaviors that we wanted to exhibit. Okay? If you're looking at a team, I think just sort of the vision and measures are good. From a company perspective, I think the values are in the behavioralization of those values quite important. Okay? But that's direction. Do we know where we're going? And can we prove it? Right? Can we prove it with the measurements? Okay. Second thing is competence. So I did want to talk a little bit more about this because competence is a little more multidimensional than some of the others. For competence, we mean essentially 3 or 4 different areas. I've got them listed as 4. First thing is technical skills. So just bluntly, if it's an IT project involving Excel, do we have Excel programmers? That's what we mean. Okay? So if we're doing something that involves nursing outcomes, do we have people that understand that, whether they're a nurse or not, or former nurse, or who knows what, right? If we're doing a project in healthcare space, in the healthcare insurance space, let's say we're doing a sales project, do we have salespeople on the team? That's what we're talking about. Second is management skills. So from a company perspective, and this is what we're doing here, is we're trying to help us build skills involving problem solving, involving workflow and process, and decision making. We're going to spend a lot of time on decision making in the back half of this course, and like I think week 6, we'll spend some time on decision making. But how do we make decisions? Do we make them unilaterally? Do we make group decisions? How long does it take us to make the decisions, and so forth? And interpersonal skills. You might consider those to be management skills as well. But the bottom one is, I think, a really important one, and a really important one for our teams. And this is why I point this out. In DMAIC and in all our projects, we also want to have skills of economic literacy. What that means, I love that phrase, but what that means as an individual contributor, or as a team, or as a project, or as a company, is that we know how what we're doing affects the financial success of the company as well. So if I'm on a project team to reduce average speed of answer on a call center, I should know why that's important in a financial sense to my company. Okay? So on the discharge one, the more I can understand how what I do in shortening the time of discharge or improving the outcome really hits the bottom line of the company, the better. Okay? So the more economically literate a team is, the better they're going to be. So that's what we mean by competence. If you keep those 2 top ones in mind, technical skills, management skills, economic literacy. Third thing is opportunity. And opportunity simply means the permission to make the improvements. Okay? Do we have the resources? Do we have the authority? Do we understand the sphere of our influence, the defined boundaries? And do we have processes that are, as a company, if we're looking at it as a company, we want to have adaptive processes, not ossified processes that are inflexible. If you're talking about on a project team, you really are looking at, do we have the resources, do we have the authority, do we understand our scope? Those are the things right there. And then finally, do we have the motivation to do it? I don't want to go too much into this slide, but I think we all understand the motivation for it. And we've had, if you're like me, you've been on teams where you've had the right people, and they're just not the right people. They don't have the can-do attitude, or they have the right skills, and we have the authority, but we need to have the right motivation. Somehow something's just not lighting the fire of what's in it for them. Okay? Part of our work is understanding what are the things that we need to do. Part of our reading work is understanding what are the things that we would like to do or need to do in order to create an atmosphere of more discretionary efforts from people. Okay, so those are the 4 attributes, and here's on slide 28 is kind of a summarization of them, of all the different things that are in there. So let's kind of talk through what that would be. If we have think about a team. If we have a team that has direction and competence and opportunity, but they're not motivated, we might call that a sluggish team or a lazy team. Or a lazy company, if they were the company. If we have a team that's got direction and competence and motivation but no opportunity, we might call that a discouraged team or a frustrated team. If we have a team that's got direction, opportunity, and motivation, that is, they really want to do it, they got the chance, they have the direction, but they don't have the right people on the team, we might call them an incompetent team or an ineffectual team, or if you're talking about a company, that's a bankrupt company. And then finally, if you have a team that's got competence, opportunity, motivation, but no direction, you might call that team confused. Don't really know what we're doing. So there's a progression to this. You really want to start with direction and build that. But one thing I would want to do is, if you think back to something that think back to a project that didn't work, which I'll ask you to do in your homework and or your exercises, and kind of outline why the team didn't work. A lot of times you'll find that when one falls, other things fall. Motivation you can deal with, but if you don't have the right people on the team, it doesn't really matter very long. If you have the opportunity, the motivation eventually drops out, and so forth. Okay, so that's it in a nutshell: direction, competence, opportunity, motivation. So you can use this on the Six Sigma project to say, if you're done with the define phase, do we have the direction? Do we have the competence? Do we have the right team? Do we have the opportunity? Is the sponsor on board? Do we understand our boundaries, our scope? And do we have the motivation? Do we have the right people in terms of, do we have people who are going to create something that's going to be of lasting value for our business and for our customers? Okay, I'm going to skip through this exercise right here, but I'd like to do this together. I'd like you to take some time, and you can fill it out right in your book on slide 32. So I'm on slide 32. I'd like you to think of a project team or a program that you think performed very, very well. And I want you to, you don't have to summarize it right here, but I want you to go through and score it on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the worst and 5 being the best that you've ever seen. You can use the guidelines on this slide to help you understand. For example, on competence, you might have score on technical, management, interpersonal, and economic literacy, and that might help inform whether it gets a 5 or a 4 or a 2. Okay? And I just want you to do that, and don't, at the moment, don't do the same for the project team that didn't perform well. Okay? But I'd like you to take a minute or 2 minutes to do this, and be prepared to share it with everybody. Okay? So let's just take two minutes to do this. Okay, just take another 30 seconds or so. Okay. All right. So let's see. Can I ask somebody to, Tracy, can I put you on the spot?
Sure.
Okay, great. So great. So what was the project or program that you chose?
The one that immediately came to mind was the team I had in the last month to improve our outpatient satisfaction scores.
Excellent. So improve outpatient SAT. Okay, so I think I think I get that. But in a nutshell, can you describe it any? Does it need to be described in any more detail than that? It's probably pretty close.
Well, basically, we have about 5 different outpatient areas where patients visit our hospital, and our scores were in the 30th percentile. And between admitting and all the areas a patient can go, all the opportunities we have to do a great job, we got a representative from each of those areas together with the goal of really the voice of the customer, but with the goal of improving those scores.
Okay, got it. Yeah. So hey, that's a different way of looking at opportunity, isn't it? Yeah. But but that's actually pretty relevant because certainly I've come into some places where the first thing they inform me is, well, we run a pretty tight ship here. We've got everything buttoned down, and you're not going to find much. Those are usually the places where I find a lot. So, okay, great. So that sounds like a great project. So how did you score it on direction?
On direction, I scored it a 5.
Okay. And why did you score it a 5?
Because I believe that we were, it's very central to our vision. We were very focused on the fact that, providing excellent service is one of our core values. We have a very clean metric on it. We had a very clear goal of what we were trying to get to, the 75th percentile.
Okay, got it. Great. Yeah, so that's excellent. So goals and metrics can really help clarify things a lot. Excellent. Okay, great. I'm glad you mentioned the metric. Okay, how about competence?
I gave this a 3 on competence.
3. Okay. And why a 3?
Looking at the competence slide, because I initially would have said, oh, these are all very competent directors, but looking at the slide and thinking about the technical skills and problem-solving, critical thinking kind of skills on the team, we had some players that weren't at the level I would say to be competent.
I see. Okay. All right. How about opportunity?
Opportunity, I gave us a 3 as well. Okay. Because I took folks with a very overwhelming schedule and full-time jobs, and we tried to squeeze this in as best we could. We did not clearly define how many, in my mind, what goes into that is that we didn't really clearly define the hours expected to be able to contribute towards the team and the efforts that we were doing. So some of it is just resources in terms of manpower. Also not clearly defining the boundaries in terms of, you know, a new building probably would be nice, but that's not what's driving our score.
Mm-hmm.
So we had some folks kind of go off on tangents at first.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, good. And then how about motivation?
Motivation, I gave them a 5.
Okay. And presumably it was all those things. I mean, look, if you understand the vision and it is something that's amenable, chances are it's going to be pretty good.
Absolutely, and
yeah.
They were motivated to do it, really got into the reward and recognition side of quickly rewarding the behaviors that we needed to see in order to drive the score up. So I felt like they did that well.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, and I can see, you know, you could have something that was that on some projects that there was a project that I years ago that I was consulting on, and this person was like the nicest person you would ever met. She was an HR person, and the project, they were in a downturn, and the project was to reduce the number, to reduce what people steal when they leave the company, when they're fired. And what a downer of a project. How do you motivate people? That, you know? But this is customer sat. It's all positive stuff. Good, good. So, you know, looking back, this might be a very clear and quick way to you know, to substantiate as you're going through a project, to say, you know, is this project on track, right? So if you were in the middle of the project and you said, you know, if you looked at it this way, you might be, you know, I would say maybe concerned slightly to say, you know, maybe we need to have, maybe we need to really understand the scope a little bit better or something like that. And that may have helped it be even more successful, although it looks like it was very successful. This is usually a tool that's very helpful if something goes south. And you can poll the team privately and ask them to do it, but it's easily understandable. Everybody kind of understands at a base level, what does direction mean, you know. So that's why I like it, and that's why I thought I'd share it with you. Thank you, Tracy. I appreciate your help there. That was a great example. Okay, well, hopefully you all had your own examples and that worked for you. And so I'm going to leave you with that on the DCOM exercise, and hopefully Jim Hilgren will think that we can keep his legacy going. He's a real friend that I'll miss a lot. Good guy. Okay, there's some other things in there that I think will be helpful. If you're reading through it, the exercise about the two supervisors I think will be very helpful to you in terms of behaviors and thinking that through. And we'll ask you to do the second part of this, the black belts at least, and the second part of this in your homework, as well as another exercise. So we're going to leave this. I'll ask you before we do, what questions do you have? Okay. DCOM's usually pretty straightforward to people. I am going to leave the crafting metrics alone right now. It's got some interesting stuff in there, but we're going to move to data collection. And obviously we've got we've got 15 minutes to the top of the hour, and then we'll stop. So we won't be able to plumb the depths of data collection. But I do want to get you guys onto the same page here in terms of what we're gonna be talking about with data collection. So just to kind of start out, we're moving now from what I would say is the define phase into what I would say is the measure phase. And if you've noticed, there's a lot of overlap between these two. So you have to know what to measure before you start measuring it, and that's going to be actually part of the discussion today. What we'll talk through in this brief time that we have is A, getting a plan to measure what we want to measure, B, defining what we need to define in a good way and in a powerful way, and then C, using an appropriate sample method, and D, potentially using a measurement tool to help us. Okay? So I'm going to go through intentionally pretty quickly through this. As you're reading through this, and I'm going to ask you mostly to read because we've got 15 minutes or so to really finish this. And you can ask me lots of questions on this, but in this section, you want to be able to come out saying, I know how to construct an effective operational definition. I can describe the different sampling alternatives that are available to me. I can, if I need to, I can pick a sampling form that makes sense, and I can put together a data collection plan that makes sense. Okay? And we'll give you an exercise to help that along. So let's start talking about, as we go in there, let's talk about why we want to collect data in the first place, because I think we can kind of all agree that, yes, it's important to collect data because we're going to be making database decisions. It's pretty difficult to make them without data. But having said it, getting data is often a very expensive endeavor. It's expensive in time, it's expensive in goodwill, and it's expensive in money. So if you measure things that really don't matter and they just sit in a database somewhere and nobody ever looks at them or analyzes them, that's not of value, and it erodes goodwill of people that are going to the trouble of making those measurements. The mentor that I had when I was at Raytheon and then later at Corning, I kept in touch with him. He had a mantra that he would say, there's no process without data, there's no data without analysis, and there's no analysis without a decision that you make. And it could be to wait, but that's what you have to get in your brain. So we're going to start with a start. And I want you to at least imagine, the perfect place for data is when we know there's a problem, or we know there's an issue, or we know that there's something of value, but we disagree on how much value or the extent of the problem or what the solution is. That's when data can be really helpful. So the way that I do this is I think about waiting in line at the supermarket, which happens to me a lot, right? I mean, or maybe if you go to Walmart or Sproul Mart or whatever, and you're in this long line, and you start to think, you start to get steamed, or at the airport, that's a good one. You start to get steamed, and you start to say, I wish they would blah. So I wish they would hire more people, or I wish they would stagger shifts to cover heavy time periods like lunch. Or I wish they would have special lines for 12 items or less. I wish they would just train people to do this right. If you're asking those questions and you're inside the business, chances are you don't know what the solution is if there's multiple. So data can help us understand that. So that's basically it. In a demand project, we're going to be essentially collecting data at two different places. The first place is baselining in measure. So when we measure, in the measure phase, we're going to be collecting baseline data, and then often in the analyze phase, sometimes in the improve phase, we're going to be collecting additional data to help us do a deeper dive or to help clarify and verify a root cause that we think we've uncovered. Or in the improve phase to help evaluate the improvements. Hey, we made a change, did it actually improve it? So we'll need data at each of those places. And it's different. It's different types of data. Okay? And I have this note here at the bottom of slide 58, and that's really, I don't know how you guys are in your business. What I can tell you is that one of the clients that I worked with, they would take months to do any data collection. And it was ridiculous. We'd get nothing done. And so I didn't understand their company well enough to understand that they were basically just playing a political game and dawdling and waiting until the project went away. So don't do that. Go out and collect some data. You know, if you're looking at key outcome data, you may only need 20 or 30 points to get a real good feeling for, is this process in control? And what's the quality level of this process? We're going to be diving into that next week, hot and heavy. So that's really starting the analysis. Okay? So we'll be doing that a lot next week. Right now we're talking about gathering that data. Okay. So I'm moving forward fairly quickly. I have a process by which I collect the data, And if I'm going to collect something, I write up a data collection plan. That data collection plan should list all the measurements that I want to collect. Okay, if I want to collect, you know, for example, if I'm in a medical practice, maybe I'm measuring time wait to see a physician, or that a customer waits to see a physician. Why am I measuring that? Well, because it's a customer attribute. It can be simple, but a lot of times I just want to list it and make sure it's really important enough to measure. I want to write out the operational definitions. I say more on this later. I'll have you read it, but an operational definition is basically just two things. It's a definition for what something is, what a measurement is, and how to measure it. Okay, so it's specific enough that says, here's what the measurement is, and here's how you do it. Okay? All right. The third thing is I write out a sampling plan. And essentially that just means I write out, I put an Excel spreadsheet together, and I say, which variables am I going to collect? Where am I going to collect it? Am I only going to collect it at one hospital, or am I going to collect it across the whole network of hospitals? Am I only going to collect the sales data on weekdays, or do I include weekends as well? Am I only going to measure the capacity of the parking lot between 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock p.m., or am I going to measure all times randomly? Okay? The third thing is, how much are we going to sample? I'll have more to say on that in later times, because we can start to understand that once we understand confidence intervals, which we're not ready to yet. But we will. Some of us are, some of us aren't. We will understand confidence intervals. Sample size will make sense then. For now, when you're collecting baseline data, when you're collecting output data, you want at least, and hopefully more, but you want at least 20 data points that are not all collected at the same time. Okay? So, or if you're measuring something like percentage of time something was met, like percentage of discharges that were done within 12 hours or 15 or 8 hours or something like that. Hopefully you do better than that. But if you're measuring that, you want 20 sets of those measurements. Okay? Not just 20 measurements of yes or no's. Okay? And then finally, there's just a couple of other questions you want. Who's going to collect, and do they need special forms, and how do we make sure that it's a quality measurement? So the culmination of it is I like thinking of it in terms of a spreadsheet, but a spreadsheet where it houses all this information. Okay. I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop after we finish operational definitions, and we'll finish this a little bit later. I'm going to ask you to try it so that we can review it next time. I think we get operational definitions. I think that's fine. You know, instead of this, I'm going to take a few minutes to just introduce you to some sampling ideas. You can read through operational definitions. I think it'll make sense to you. I'm going to talk through some sampling, and just to tell you very quickly what's there. I think we all understand what a sample is. A sample is something where I can't take the whole population. I just take a certain proportion of it, or a certain portion of it. Okay? When I need to do that, there are several different types of sampling. The pictures, I think, make the most sense. A simple random sample, or what people just call a basic random sample, is, I think of it as a hat where I put all the different, think about, you know, selecting people out of a hat, put everyone's name in a hat, I mix it up thoroughly, and I just pick. Okay? I might pick 100, and it's a random pattern that occurs across it. The key thing is here, every person in that hat had an equally likely chance of being sampled. So if I'm sampling patients who come into a outpatient clinic, I would sample randomly by looking at all the different patients at a single day. Maybe I'd sample a random time that somebody comes up to a desk, and I say the random time is 12:37, and the next person who comes up to the desk after 12:37 is my sample. That would be an example of trying to take a random sample. Okay? A stratified sample, and by the way, a simple random sample, in some ways that's the best way because it's the simplest and it's guaranteed to not be biased. A stratified sample is something that you use to get a more powerful sample to have a smaller sample size. And what that works is you divide into blocks and then sample according to that. You can sample proportionately. That's one way of doing it. There are other ways of doing it too, but proportionate sample makes sense. So let's go through an example of that. Suppose you wanted to do, you were a pollster and you wanted to collect people's opinion on a certain election. What you might do is you might divide, I'm not saying this is a smart thing to do, I don't know. I'm not a pollster, but you might divide ethnicities. You might want to look at, hey, different ethnicities would be different, so I want to make sure I have so many Caucasians, so many African Americans, so many Latinos, right? And that's what this is right here. This is the total population, and then I would sample a simple random sample in each of those blocks. Okay, that's stratified. The third thing, and I think that this is probably usually the easiest and often the best in a process-oriented thing, is to take a sequential sample. And a sequential sample samples every third or every 10th or every 100th unit. Okay, you can imagine something coming down a factory assembly line, and I'm going to pick every 10th chocolate that's, if I'm Lucy in the old Lucy and Ricky thing, I'm taking every 10th chocolate off of the assembly line and I'm sampling that chocolate. Okay? That's what that is. Very often that's much more convenient in terms of keeping track of things, so that's why we do it that way. There are some inherent problems in that, but not too much. It's a pretty safe sampling method. It's not too bad. There aren't too many pitfalls that you can get into that. The worst type of sampling method is the judgment method. You sample, oh, I think that this person best represents everything that we want, so I'm going to make sure that they get in that sample. That is the worst kind of sample, because what happens in those things is we inject our own personal biases, and they can skew the numbers that we're looking at. Okay? Even if our best intentions are to not do that. So the best that we can do is to make it a random sample. That's the best way that we can ensure that our sample is not biased. And in fact, we can understand then what are the likelihoods, and we can actually do statistics and statistical calculations on things. Now, suffice it to say that almost every sample in the real world is part random, if it's done well, is part random and part judgment, or part other constraints that come in, because we live in the real world. And sometimes we just can't sample randomly from the night shift because there just weren't that many shipments, and we know LaToya was working on the night shift, and we know she's been given the performance counseling several times, and so it's a skewed sample. But we can't get anybody else to work the night shift, so that's what we have to do. Okay? I didn't want to single out LaToya. It could have been John as well, or Mark as well. Okay. So those are the different types of samples that are available to you. Okay. So I think I'm going to stop there. I don't think anything else in here should give you any problem. There's some rules of thumb on sample size that are in here, and there are a few types of data forms that are in here. But basically, it's really just kind of filling out this particular spreadsheet as you're doing it. There's an exercise on this, and I think when you get to that point in your projects, we'll be able to walk through it together. One thing I didn't mention, and I want to right now, is hopefully you can still see my screen. There is an online tool, and you all have access to this data platform. There is an online tool called Measurement Mentor, which does exactly that. It walks through all the different steps from sampling plan to creating operational definitions, and it stores it all for you. It does it all for you. So it's just kind of nice, and creates a report for you too. So it's just kind of a nice way of creating a data collection plan if you have a more extensive data collection plan. it's helpful to do it, and then to keep it forever, essentially. It's a good way of doing it. Here's what it looks like, in fact. Steps 1 through 7, and you just kind of walk through all the things. Okay, so I'm going to stop here, and I do want to talk a little bit about assignment 2, but before we do, I'll just mention in passing that, again, assignment 1 is due today. You can turn it in anytime today. Assignment 2 will go out tomorrow morning. It will be very, very similar. And just like the first assignment, which I'm going to open right here, this is the Greenbelt assignment. You'll want to simply respond directly in the right in the body there. Okay, so just make your comments in there. That's great. If you need, again, if it's a black belt and you're responding to various, more is not always better, that article, you'll want to write in there. If you're doing an exercise, you can put it right in there. If you need to attach a slide, that's fine too. Okay. Well, that's about it for today, gang, and that's about it for today. And so thanks for tuning in, and Patrick, we'll talk to you tomorrow. Brad on Thursday. Sue, and I don't know if Shanny's going to be there tomorrow, but Sue and Shanny tomorrow, and Tracy, John, and Rod next week. Now, for all of you, the other thing is that next week we begin part of the analytics, and we're not doing a ton of it, but you'll want to have Excel stats on there. So if you haven't yet loaded everything on, gotten all the files in that, please call me and we'll walk through it with a screen together, and we'll get it done. Okay? So thanks a lot. We'll see you on Friday, if not before then. Okay?
Thank you, Mark.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Mark. Bye.
See you.